So I think having a little bit of pressure is good. What does it mean for the dynamics with Checo? Or today is Checo, tomorrow or day after it could be, or the year after it could be somebody else. Does this mean that when there's only one set of updates, does it mean it's guaranteed to go to Lance? Who knows? You know, there's a lot of tricky dynamics at play. And frankly, these are questions which I don't think they can perhaps answer today, or they want to. They definitely won't want to answer, but I don't think they know the answers.
But I think there are maybe issues that need addressing before the season starts, and very much if we've just got one set of updates, who gets them? And that needs to be set in stone. What normally happens in a racing team, of course, the person with the most points gets the updates and the upgrades first. That needs to be set in stone, and it's a difficult. Omar Safnar as team principal, I think he's very good at giving his drivers freedom, but then coming down hard as and when he needs to be, and has obviously had experience with Checo and Esteban in the past on that one. Lawrence Stroll is a businessman, is a very successful businessman, so won't want to be making decisions that jeopardise his business interest, which is, of course, Racing Point's a Formula One team. And it is, to me, utterly fascinating, and I kind of raise this topic, it's another subplot to this season that I'm looking forward to seeing how it pans out. What I'm really looking forward to seeing is Lance Stroll getting his elbows out and being able to race a little further up the grid than he was last year at Williams.
Well, also, I think, and I don't know what you think about this, but I believe this is also the first time we'll be able to judge Lance as a pure racing driver in some ways, you know, provided the cars are equal. Because, you know, season one he was a complete rookie, and he was up against Massa, who was on his way out and got pulled back in, and, you know, it wasn't a true benchmark, because you had two drivers at complete polar opposite ends of their careers. Last year he was up against another rookie, so again you couldn't really judge them. Whereas now he's up against Checo Perez, who last year, you know, was an equal for Esteban Ocon. Yeah. They were very evenly matched, and he's now pretty well established. He's finished on the podium. He does a good, solid job. So I think we'll finally be able to judge Lance as a pure racing driver as well, which in a way I think is good for Lance, because, you know, it's a criticism that's often leveled against him, isn't it? He's there only because of his dad's money, but now he's got an opportunity to prove that.
Yeah, it's a criticism I don't buy. Yes, his dad's money has funded his junior career, but that's a personal sponsorship that's come from his father. Lewis Hamilton's junior career was funded by McLaren. Daniel Ricciardo's junior career was funded by Red Bull. Your junior career was funded by sponsors. You know, somebody's got to pay for it somehow, and be it personal money from the family or money that's come in from sponsors, it makes no difference. The money's still got to be found. Yep. And I don't think Lawrence has done anything that any other father wouldn't have done. So I don't address that or take that criticism as being relevant in this case.
No, I get that, but you could see why. I can also understand why some people do have that viewpoint. You know, I think it's at the end of the day, it's the nature of this sport that money can buy success. In junior formula, for example, the more money you've got, the more testing you can do, the more R&D you can do, and things like that. You know, it's the same in Formula 1, but to a smaller scale. And unquestionably, when he raced in Formula 3 with Prima, he had those resources which perhaps other teams didn't. So, you know, I think that it's important to give Lance the benefit of judging him on his merits as a racing driver, and I think we'll have that opportunity this year for the first time.
Absolutely. One thing I would say, just finally on Lance Stroll, if he starts as well as he has done through his Williams career, remember his first race in Australia where he picked up 6 or 7 places right at the start before he finally put his brakes on and still kept the car under control. If he does that in Australia this year, chances are he's heading towards the top 3 on the inside at rather a rapid rate. Can't wait to see that either. Now, we're looking at the head-on shot of the Ferrari of Sebastian Vettel here. Do you fancy having a look at the rear end and there, that exhaust solution and the wastegate pipes above the exhaust? Because it's attracted a lot of attention from pre-season launches. before we got to the testing gear. So let's take a closer look, shall we, at the rear end of that Ferrari.
So one of the regulation changes this year was about the way the exhaust outlets were and how they could be directed.
They've changed the angle of elevation a bit to stop kind of blowing hot air over the rear wing.
Exactly, it's blowing the hot air of the rear wing, and you know, the way it's all designed to do with the way the air flows off the rear wing and affects the car behind. The Ferrari powered cars, so this works car, the Alfa Romeo, as well as the Haas, have all got a slightly interesting solution where they've got the main exhaust pipe, they've got two smaller pipes above it, which is the outlet from the wastegate from the turbo, and so they've used that as a bit of a loophole to try and recoup some of the downforce, but it's all marginal gains, but in a very, you know, Team Sky cycling Dave Brailsford sort of way. It's all about marginal gains, and that's what Formula One is in many ways these days.
Absolutely, but I wonder if any other teams will be able to replicate that if they so wish. I mean, Haas and Alfa aside, obviously. But let's just have a little look once again. There you can see it. It's like a little sighter above the main exhaust.
And if you look at the T-wing also in that Ferrari, you can see just above that exhaust. Look at how much it wobbles around. I was noticing it there. Look at how much it shakes. And that
so how is that having any effect if it's wobbling around like that?
Well, but that's the point of testing.
Yeah, because it's there to deflect air.
Yeah.
Flow somewhat.
Yeah, so they might look at it, and again, it's a weight versus aero balance there. So how do you make it more rigid and how do you make it more solid? It's by adding more material to the mounting of it, right? So you add more, a thicker, stronger material, and it'll shake around less. However, by adding more material at that high up, that height, that's raising the center of gravity. So that's the negative. So, you know, designing a Formula One car is all about compromises, and you know, clearly Ferrari believe that they got the right compromise. Maybe they'll change it. You know, maybe they'll look at today and go, well, actually, that's not particularly good for our aero. Let's try a more rigid structure, and let's see. You know, the weight's obviously not good, but let's see if it helps the aeroflow.
A few last tweets from me. Can my friend Colin have a shout out? Says Chris, big Ferrari fan in America. He was recovering from a skiing accident last month. Get well soon, Colin. Says Chris, I don't normally do shout outs, but you know, we'll do a shout out for your mate Colin there as well. And one more tweet from you all. The closest we've ever been to the Stroll scenario was with David Brabham in 1990.
Not true, because by that stage the Brabham family did not own the team.
There you are, you see. So we
So
didn't get very close at all.
David's a former teammate of mine and a good friend, and actually he spent many years fighting a court case to get the Brabham name back to the family.
Yeah,
and so
he's got it now, hasn't he?
Yep.
Because they're running Le Mans.
They're planning to. The aim is for 2021, I believe. But poor old David and his family, they've spent an awful lot of time and money and energy getting that name back, and it's nice. It's a nice part of F1 history, isn't it, that it's back to the family?
Absolutely, I totally agree. It has been an utter pleasure, Karun Chandok, sharing a commentary box with you today.
Yes, it's been a long time, Mr. Croft. It's been 6 years since we last shared a commentary box.
But we've more than made up for it, to be honest, because I've been sat in that chair for the last 3 hours, and with the time now exactly 5 o'clock here in Barcelona, I'm going to say a goodbye for the time being. I'll see you with the review show in about an hour's time, when we can all pop down to the paddock and have a little look at the highlights of today. And I will leave you in the company of Karun Chandok and Alex Jacks.
Well, interesting. Romain Grosjean's just popped up to second fastest on the day. He's on a set of the yellow sidewall medium compound tyres. That's a pretty good lap. He's doing quite a short run, I think, because he's done a fast lap. Now he's done a slow 1:31.7, so he's done a hot, a cool, and he's on our screen at the moment through turn 4. Haas, obviously last year, they created a little bit of a stir, really, because Magnussen did, you know, on fuel tyre corrected, the second fastest time of winter testing, I remember last year on a set of super softs, and that was particularly impressive. And when we got to Melbourne, everyone was sort of wondering, well, what was going on there? Were they underweight? Were there something tricky? But as the season opened up, it became quite clear that Haas did have a competitive package, and yet again, so far, they're showing a pretty decent term of speed. The car out on track looked pretty balanced as well, although he's got a little bit of slidey coming out of that corner. I think that's to do with the rear tyres going off rather than anything else. Clearly, the rear tyres, again, there's a snap of oversteer as he put the power down coming out of the final corner. DRS open past our commentary box, and he does a 19.356. So, yeah, I mean, in these slightly cooler temperatures, he is getting 2 laps, but clearly the first one is the quicker of the two, and where the tyres are hanging on here is the exit of turn 12, and have that snap of oversteer there. So, Alex, have you what's caught your eye? We're heading into the final hour of testing. What have you been seeing? What do you think of today?
It's hugely exciting. Hello, Karun. Hello, everyone at home. Whether you're getting home from work or you're enjoying half term, maybe getting in from a lecture, there is no better feeling than the first day of Formula One testing. And it is good to be here. It's good to be commentating with you. It's been a while as well. Not as long as you and Crofty.
No, but I think the last time you and we were in a bunker somewhere commentating on GP3 race, weren't we?
3 levels down at Biggin Hill, commentating on a mad Russian weekend there. Here in Spain, fantastic pictures. Grosjean, who had a bit of a dramatic morning, the morning session, which started almost immediately with a red flag for Kimi Räikkönen, and then Grosjean had a spin of his own, exactly the same place as he had the spin back in the Grand Prix here 1 year ago. And then from that point of view, we had a mini spin for Sebastian Vettel, and then Grosjean stopped just about there before he got to the chicane. So a good recovery this from Haas after a difficult morning for them. What's caught my eye, the Ferrari looks very, very stable. It looks like it's having the time of its life out there. Considering this is day one, went down to turn 10, and you got an amazing view at turn 10. Sometimes it doesn't always come across, but you do have a fantastic view into the braking zone, the hairpin there, and then up round basically the entire final sector. If you stand in the middle, you get a great idea. And I didn't have that idea. That's what all the top brass of Formula One do, Karun, to assess the competition. And this, of course, is where the data ends and the reality begins.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's an interesting situation we've got here, because you got the last hour of testing. You got people like Lewis Hamilton who've obviously done half a day, but a guy like Sebastian Vettel, he's had a winter away from the cockpit. Same with Max Verstappen, and they've been training hard and all the rest of it. But nothing beats the G-forces on your neck, like a race car, and driving it around and around. So I'm pretty sure Seb and Max and people like who's the other one who's done 102 laps there, Carlos Sainz, another one in the McLaren. Their necks are going to feel it tomorrow. There's no question about it. And but it's amazing how the muscles just come back alive. It takes a couple of days in a race car, and all of these muscles that you hadn't used over the winter around your neck and your shoulders start to wake up again and come alive. And it's a good feeling. It's like when you had a week away from the gym and you go back and you do a hard day of training and you got that muscle pain. There's a sort of sadistic pleasure in that, and I think that's what these guys are going to be feeling tomorrow. So see Lewis Hamilton on a recovery lap there. The lights flashing away as he recharges the batteries, recoups a bit of energy. We're still out on Twitter, by the way, so do tweet us questions on #SkyF1. Alex and I here for the next hour, and then we've got the wrap-up show with Rachel and Crofty and Craig Slater. We're all going to be down in the paddock with the news of the day as Daniel Ricciardo comes into the pits.
Yeah, stopping on his marks on this his first afternoon as a Renault driver. I think everyone has almost adjusted to the fact he's wearing yellow now rather than the traditional navy and blue of first Toro Rosso and then Red Bull. And the bold move, the the peak of the silly season, wasn't it, Karun? What do you think? What's your best guess as to why he has taken what is an undoubted risk and gone to Renault?
I think he looked at the situation at Red Bull and could see Max getting stronger and stronger and stronger as the year went on, and basically felt that if the Red Bull Honda came good, and if Honda came good in particular, then Max would be the one who would be the favourite child, and Max would be the one who would be the championship favourite. So instead of being the number 2 to Max at Red Bull, he decided to go be a number 1 potentially at Renault. Now,
well, potentially, as you say.
Yeah, but I think it is a huge risk because you know, it's one of those questions. Every human being is different. Every driver is different. You know, personally, if I was ever in that situation, I wasn't. But you'd always choose being the number 1 at a top team. Being a number 2 at a top team, I think, because you know, you look at someone like David Coulthard, for example. You know, he had those years at McLaren where, you know, Mika became sort of default number 1 in the eyes of Ron Dennis, 98, 99, winning those world championships. But DC was there, winning Grand Prix. He got to win various Grand Prix, and then there was a year where Mika, 2001, wasn't having a good year. He didn't get on with the car, lost the motivation a little bit, and all of a sudden DC became the championship favourite. Look at Eddie Irvine at Ferrari.
Yeah,
you know,
1999.
He powered on as the number 2 and then got his opportunity. And, you know, you're not going to get that if you're not in a top team. So it's a huge risk for any driver to walk away from a top seat. And, you know, Rubens Barrichello is one for who it worked out. You know, he walked away from Ferrari, went to Honda, had a 3-year stint where the car wasn't very good, but then lucked into the Brawn in 2009
yes.
and was able to be a championship contender and win some races. So
you wouldn't have taken that decision? You wouldn't have, what is essentially deliberately chosen to not be in a race-winning team
I
in terms of
wouldn't
caliber?
have done it. No.
And of course the squad, Renault based at Enstone, they have a history of winning races. They have a history of winning championships, but not for a while now. Got to go back to 2006 with Fernando Alonso.
Exactly, but I think I would have gambled on staying at Red Bull and hoped that the Red Bull Honda was competitive this year. In 2 years' time, he could have gone to Renault anyway. Renault would have had him in 2 years' time.
Yeah.
And by then, he could have won some races at Red Bull Honda. He could have maybe won a championship at Red Bull Honda if the Honda turns out to be amazing. So, I think in some ways he's gone a little bit early, because also Renault aren't yet ready to be a top team. They might be in 2020 or 2021, but I don't think they're going to be in 2019.
It would be a huge shock, wouldn't it? If you look at the progress that they have made, they were perhaps a little bit fortunate with the disqualifications for the Haas cars on a couple of occasions. Romain Grosjean had a very scruffy start to last year.
But they didn't get a podium, did they?
No. But ultimately, if you see what the team is saying, they're not saying positions, they're saying progress.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I think he could have potentially waited a couple of years. But then, in 2 years' time, would his stock value have gone down? You know, when he signed for Renault, his stock value was still very high. But then Max went on and run 9 races in a row of out-qualifying and outscoring Daniel. So, you know, then as the year went on, Daniel's stock value started to go downhill. So maybe he signed when his stock value was at its highest and he got the most amount of money for it.
It's interesting because I think he was a little bit surprised that his stock wasn't as high as he expected it to be. I think he expected to have various serious chats with Ferrari. Obviously, we've got Charles Leclerc there, and then very serious chats. Certainly, I think Mercedes is somewhat confusing to him. Mercedes have a great team harmony. Obviously, Bottas without the win last year, and then Ferrari have gone down an almost un-Ferrari route by putting a driver from their academy in the car at last. He's found the door shut, and so gone to Renault. But that is going to be a really interesting thing because Hülkenberg, no pushover.
No, and Crofty and I talked about before. I think it's a big year for Nico Hülkenberg. So, yeah, let's see. I mean, I was just looking at some questions here. So, Orbit GFX asks opinions on Robert Kubica returning to F1 because as a Polish person, I am stoked. So actually, I haven't really talked about it. I don't know if you and Will and Crofty discussed it earlier, but we didn't really talk about Robert Kubica yet.
We spoke about it a little bit. We spoke about the sheer determination
Well, it's a
and
great
will
human
to
story.
get back on this grid.
Yeah, it's a great human story. Isn't it? I mean, I've known Robert since 2005. We raced together in World Series by Renault, and he's a friend as much as anything else. And you know, to see him go through what he went through in 2011 with that accident, it's no exaggeration to say this is a guy who literally has come back from being on really death's bed to coming back to driving and racing at the pinnacle of motorsport is an extraordinary human story. But he wants to be judged as one of 20 racing drivers. He doesn't want to be. What's going on here? As Daniel Kvyat and Lewis Hamilton messing around with
Nearly a silly accident. Oh, it feels like practice already.
Yeah, they're sort of trying to get out of each other's way, but not really doing it particularly well. But Lewis is now back out. But yeah, Kubica, I mean, it's an amazing human story, but he wants to be judged not as someone who's got, you know, lingering injuries to his right arm and therefore some certain limitations in his mobility with that arm. He wants to be judged as a racing driver like every other one of those 19 guys on the grid. So, and when we get to Melbourne, and we get to qualifying in Melbourne, he will be. And he's not got an easy job. I think George Russell is a properly good talent, and he's going to be a hard challenge for Robert to take on. You know, hopefully when the Williams does show up here in Barcelona, we'll be able to see that it's a reasonably competitive package and more competitive than last year. Hamilton running a little bit wide out of turn 2, got a little bit scruffy there as he's going to have to abort this lap and have another go.
It's quite an interesting lineup at Williams, because you have the Formula 2 champion in George Russell coming off the back, and maybe he's got a little bit lost, of a equally dominant season as Charles Leclerc. 7 wins for George Russell, 7 wins for Charles Leclerc. Stoffel Van Dorn did a similar thing. Completely different paths for Van Dorn and Leclerc in Formula 1, as you will all know at home, but that does show you the level of talent at junior level that George Russell is bringing in, and
Norris and Albon.
Oh, absolutely.
The top three
are all here. Only happened once before, and they have all graduated this year. Big day for all of them tomorrow, or at least it would have been. Of course, Williams not running for a second day. You've been close to the team. You've worked with them. I know you do a lot of stuff with them on the historic side. How much will they be hurting about the fact that they're going to be 2 days late to this test?
It hurts, unquestionably. You know, if I popped down to see Claire and some of the team earlier, and you know, it's absolutely gutting for them to be sitting here listening to these cars going around.
Yeah.
Because they're sitting here listening to these cars going around, and every minute that they can hear cars going, they're thinking, oh, we're losing valuable track time.
Yeah.
And and deep down, it will hurt in the pit of their stomach that this is not a day that they're participating in. So, you know, it will hurt, because mileage is so restricted nowadays in Formula 1. You got these 8 days of pre-season testing. You got a couple of days in Hungary mid-season. You got a couple of the Pirelli tests, and then a couple of days post-season. So really, it's not a lot of testing. If you compare, you know, I was looking through some notes from 2002 or 2003, I think, when I was at the Williams Heritage Workshop the other day. And there was one particular day, they had 4 cars testing in 3 different circuits on the same day. There was, you know, there was a car doing start practice. There was a car doing Monaco high downforce testing. There were 2 cars doing a tire test, all on the same day. You think of all the miles that Ferrari used to do at Fiorano. You speak to Luciano Berti and Luca Badoa, the test drivers. You know, they'd be testing from the moment the sun rose until it got dark at Fiorano. You know, Michael Schumacher and Eddie Irvine used to do free practice in Monaco on Thursday, go to Fiorano on Friday, test all day long at Fiorano.
When everyone else is having the rest day on the Friday in Monaco.
Come back on Friday night and then qualify on Saturday. So
that's not the traditional Monaco partying image that you might have of that weekend. But cost-wise, it was astronomical.
Exactly.
Which is why they've imposed these restrictions.
So all that to say, for Williams now to miss 25% of pre-season testing,
it's enormous when you put it like that.
Is a big, big blow. Here's Valtteri Bottas and Toto Wolff, Valtteri Bottas.
The Bottas beard.
He's sporting his beard, isn't he?
What do you reckon to that? That is that part of a new year, new me? Forget about 2018. Hits the ground running. Everyone stops talking about this lack of win.
Well, he was he was really unlucky to not win last year.
Huge.
He should have won in Baku. I think he should have won in China. Definitely should have won in Sochi when he would go for Lewis. Arguably, I think he should have won in Bahrain if Mercedes understood that Vettel was on a one-stop strategy sooner, and then he could have pushed a bit harder earlier on. So I think there were definitely 3, arguably 4 wins that Valtteri could have had. And actually, that early part of the season, if you think about it, if he'd won Bahrain, if he'd won Baku, and he'd won in China, that's 3 out of the first 4 races, he would have been ahead of Lewis in the World Championship. He would have had momentum on his side, and his whole season would have looked different, I think. So
everyone writing, is it Rosberg again? Articles, completely different narrative around his entire year.
Again, we've got Kvyat.
They're getting stuck into each other, aren't they?
I don't know who's messing whose run up here. It does look like Kvyat.
Yeah, Hamilton not happy there.
No, and he's not. He needs to get far away from the Toro Rosso, I think. But they're trying to get lap after lap, repeated runs. But this is interesting as well, though, isn't it, Alex? Because we're getting to see how close the cars can follow each other.
Absolutely.
So he's backed out of it, but
he doesn't fancy it anymore.
Yeah. But that's a bit telling, isn't it? That a Mercedes, with these new front wing rules, wasn't able to overtake a Toro Rosso easily.
Yeah, and the initial out of the box pace, I know you can't judge too much in terms of lap times on day number 1, but you would be expecting, of course, that W10 Mercedes to be easily getting past. Maybe not in that part of the racetrack, but he's behind him for a couple of laps. The changes that you can clearly see, the wider front wing, the slightly higher rear wing, and the chasm that is now DRS when that rear wing opens. It's slightly wider as well at the back of the car, designed to improve overtaking. Do you think it will?
Proof will be in the pudding, won't it?
It certainly will.
Talk to me after the first 4 races. Again, we can't judge it really till we get to there. So let us see. I'm trying to see if there's a few more questions. So on the subject of Bottas, Alex, let's go back to that. Ewan Warren asks, if Bottas isn't able to improve in 2019 and loses his Mercedes seat to Ocon, where do you see his future going? Would another team want him, or would he leave F1 altogether? Make no mistake, Valtteri Bottas is a very, very good and fast racing driver. This is a guy who, on his day, has been capable of qualifying and beating Lewis Hamilton, who is arguably the best qualifier in the history of F1 since Ayrton Senna. So this is a very fast racing driver, and much like I think Ferrari did the right thing by replacing Kimi with Leclerc, and I'm also very glad Kimi's found a seat at Alfa Romeo. If Valtteri, this is a big year for Valtteri. I think if you ask me who are the 2 drivers under the most pressure coming into the season, I would say it's Valtteri and Sebastian Vettel for 2 different reasons.
Okay.
I think Valtteri Bottas is under pressure because you got Esteban Ocon lurking, you got George Russell lurking, both with Mercedes contracts, both snapping at Toto Wolff's heels, saying, "Sign me up, sign me up, sign me up." And if Valtteri doesn't deliver this year, Toto will sign one of them up. So it's a big year for him. For Sebastian, Ferrari have drafted in Charles Leclerc to take Kimi's seat. So Sebastian's gone from this nice little comfort zone of being a number 1 with Kimi a couple of tenths behind to having this young pup who's young, motivated, and very, very fast, and also a big part of the Ferrari system already. He's been a big part of the family for many years now. He knows them well, they know him well, and so I think those are the 2 drivers under the most amount of pressure. So yeah, I think to answer the question that came on social media from Ewan, I think if Valtteri doesn't step up, he will be replaced at the end of this year.
But I think he knows that going in.
Yeah, he knows that going in. And if he does get replaced, he will find a seat elsewhere in F1 because he's a quality driver.
Yeah, I think he is going up against Lewis Hamilton in the form of his life, which I don't think anyone on the grid would do particularly well with. And as you say, was driving well at the start of the year. Maybe the question with Valtteri is, when the head goes down, does it stay down? Does he have a problem motivating himself? Because we saw in the first season, got himself into a little bit of a lull after the summer break. Similar thing happened when the win didn't come this year. He cannot afford that in 2019, otherwise it's back to the midfield.
Yeah, so let's see. Daniel asks, Alex, which underdog F1 team, P4 to P10, do you think would be the likeliest in the future to win a constructor's title?
Well, that might need a little bit of a rule tweak.
Yeah, but let's say, which, if you had to pick one, so you'd have to say Renault have got the resources in terms of money and being a manufacturer team to do it. You'd like to think that one day, and if you take your romantic F1 historical sort of perspective, it'd be lovely to see McLaren and Williams competitive again, wouldn't it? That's, they're part of F1's history in the same way as Ferrari are. They're part of F1's DNA.
Absolutely.
And I think everyone would love to see both McLaren and Williams competitive.
Looking at the Williams garage right now, as they are still preparing, still working on getting the car ready for what we now expect to be Wednesday. I think the McLaren car, in terms of its design, has impressed a few people today. To answer the question, it's most likely McLaren have phenomenal facilities, and it's worth underlining the same applies for the car that you're looking at the moment, the Alpha. That has the old BMW wind tunnel. It's got a lot of staff from Audi's old World Endurance Championship, and there is huge talent, but the step at the moment, last year there was a big three for a reason. Only driver on the podium last year who wasn't from the big three was Sergio Perez, who had his best 4 laps of the season, when it absolutely counted in classic Sergio Perez style. Sniff of a podium, he got the podium. That's fine on one occasion to get one podium in a crazy race in Baku. Doing it week in, week out, you can't really cheat that. You can't really drive around the problem, and the sheer performance of Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull's a long way clear. At least it was last year. I think Renault, you'd have to say.
I feel bad for these Williams mechanics, aren't they? They're sort of, doing all these jobs and just trying to kill the time. Look at these two again, Alex. Lewis and Daniel Kvyat.
We saw a replay, and these two, I mean, I'm not entirely sure whether they're doing it deliberately or whether they are going to be getting incredibly irritated with each other. But
well, I think Mercedes need to call Lewis in for a drive-through, because then he can make a nice big gap. Actually, I've just looked out of the commentary box window to his pit board. I think they've called him in, so he's backed out of this lap.
Yeah, last time around he was doing a 1:24.5, Kvyat a 1:25.8.
Well, that's why he's catching him. he keeps backing off.
Yeah, catching him immediately.
Catches him immediately. So it's a bit frustrating for Lewis, really. But yeah, reigning world champion, 72 laps on the board for the afternoon. So that's a good haul of laps, isn't it?
Yeah, 66 the race distance here normally, as we get another look at these two tripping over each other.
Yeah, he's all over the back of that Toro Rosso. But interesting, look, even in the last corner, he struggles to follow closely behind him. Has a good slipstream down the straight. Doesn't actually use DRS, which, by the way, in this year's regulations, the DRS slot is now been increased.
Yes.
So actually, the DRS is going to be more powerful and more effective, which I don't know if I'm a big fan of, to be honest. I was never a fan of DRS from the day it got introduced, because I felt, as a purist, I felt it was slightly artificial. I understand why they've done it, but I've never been a huge fan of DRS, and making the slot bigger just makes it slightly more artificial. I think back to when we had all those great overtaking moves. It wasn't about quantity, it's about quality. However, I do accept that with how aerodynamically sophisticated these cars are, and how complex they are, it's not as easy to follow as it was in the 90s, for example, when we saw Nigel Mansell go around the outside of Gerhard Berger at Peraltada. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, I'm sure there's a video somewhere online on the Formula 1 website about great overtakes and
absolutely
Mansell going around the outside of Gerhardt's.
So we're going to get an overtake here. We're getting a replay of Lewis Hamilton finally pulling alongside and getting past the Toro Rosso down to turn 1, and no contest from either of them. And that problem disappears then for the world champion. More questions. Get your questions into #SkyF1. Phil asks, my friend Colin wants to know why Williams can't run the 2018 cars just for the drivers to get back in the swing of things.
Frankly, it's about money. It's about resource. You know, to run one of these cars per day costs probably £150,000, and it involves people, and it involves a whole lot of logistics issues. Now, if Williams are up against it, getting this year's car up and running, then they might as well put every spare body they've got into getting this year's car built in time, and not divert any resources to using last year's car. Plus, last year's car is quite different. The wings are different, the barge boards are different, the aero level is different. So, yes, you can use the car to get the drivers up to speed, but frankly, they've got two drivers who've driven last year's car a reasonable amount now, and they don't really need that. They both know Barcelona intimately well. They don't need more laps of the circuit to learn it, so they're much better off really having that effort and money and time spent to trying to get this year's car out the door.
So Williams, a former great team, all those champions, of course, Jacques Villeneuve, Damon Hill, Nigel Mansell in the past. They're struggling. Another team that struggled last year was McLaren, currently the second fastest time on a 1:19.3. Carlos Sainz has had a bit of an issue stopping at the end of the pit lane. Pretty much the only real incident that we've seen this afternoon. And another question in from Harry asks, who will score more points this season, Carlos Sainz or Lando Norris? And no reflection of Lando Norris's ability at all. He is a huge talent, as he proved last year, and he's proved all the way through his racing career. Last year in Formula 2, the runner-up, first time he has not won a championship that he's entered. I think there's another one as well, but it was only a minor series. So he's used to winning titles. Had that run ended by George Russell. Gets the promotion up to Formula 1, and difficult teammate to be paired with in terms of raw speed, because although Carlos Sainz has had quite a strange couple of years, could easily have been in the Red Bull alongside Verstappen, made a big deal of wanting to get out of Toro Rosso, went to Renault, and now finds himself in McLaren. So bit of an odd situation for him to be shuffling about the grid so much.
Yeah, but to answer the question that came in, I think Carlos will outscore Lando if I had to pick one of them, just purely based on experience. I'll be interested to see how Lando goes this year. As you say, he did a very good job in his rookie season of Formula 2. He's Formula 3 champion before that, and he's been a very well-prepared rookie in terms of having a lot of FP1 sessions, a lot of testing, a lot of simulator time. He's integrated himself well into the whole McLaren world down at Woking. So he's very much part of the furniture there, and I'll be interested to see how he gets on in comparison with Carlos, who, Carlos hasn't had a podium yet, so he's not an established top-line driver, but he is an established, good Formula 1 driver who's had some very good results at Toro Rosso in particular, but also in Renault. He had some good point-scoring races last year.
So into the final half hour of this opening day of testing for Formula 1 in 2019. A driver who will almost certainly finish at the top of the timing pages, Sebastian Vettel. You mentioned him earlier, Karun, in terms of being under enormous pressure. Was the team trying to give him a little bit of confidence, saying that he would be the favoured driver at their launch earlier a couple of days ago?
Possibly. I must admit, I didn't hear the exact words that were said. I read a few of the headlines across the internet and social media, but I didn't actually hear the exact words. So I think ultimately, and I know this from experience, teams gravitate towards a guy or girl who's quicker. It's ultimately, the stopwatch never lies. And when we get to Melbourne, or when we get to, you know, the first few races, if Seb is out qualifying Leclerc on a regular basis, then the team will gravitate towards him. However, if we get there and Leclerc is holding his own and starts to qualify Seb, they're going to have equal status. I can't see how or why Ferrari would favor one driver over the other unless there's a clear performance delta between them.
The quote was from new team principal Mattia Binotto, if there are particular situations, our priority will be Sebastian.
Okay. So,
but you don't.
So that's still a bit vague, though, isn't it? Because that doesn't
it
say,
is a little bit, isn't it?
That doesn't actually say what the particular scenario situations are. So, yeah, I think ultimately it will come down to the stopwatch, and I'll be very surprised if they don't give Leclerc an equal opportunity, at least at the start of the season. I think Ferrari need to learn from their lessons last year, which is, I think there was a management failure in some ways where they didn't back Sebastian early enough. You know, Hockenheim last year, you know, it was crazy when they had a situation where Seb came up behind Kimi, and they took forever to get Kimi out of the way. Seb lost about 6 or 7 seconds, and it was at a time when Lewis was catching him. You know, the drizzle started to come down, Hamilton was gaining, and really, they shouldn't have put Seb under the extra pressure.
Yeah.
And finally, it took for Kimi to come on the radio and say, just tell me what you want me to do. And they went, oh, just get out of the way. All right, then. And he did. So, you know, they shouldn't ever have those situations middle of the race. It should be, right, middle of the season, who's leading the championship? Who's the horse that we're going to back?
Yeah.
Right, you, Seb, you're miles ahead. Charles, sorry, you're the number 2 for the rest of this year. Too bad.
Yeah.
Next year, you have your next chance. And I think they need to do that more. You know, what they did or didn't do, in fact, in Hockenheim, hurt them. And then they compounded it by a bizarre situation in Monza where, you know, they chose to give Kimi the slipstream in qualifying, and then instead of asking him to support Seb on race day morning, they sacked him on race day morning.
It wasn't exactly motivation for Kimi Räikkönen to play the team game.
And, you know, Toto got a lot of flack after Sochi for imposing team orders there and, you know, making Valtteri get out the way and give Lewis the victory. And I think he 100% did the right thing by imposing the team order. What I think he did wrong in that instance was not having the conversation before the race. So then you had Valtteri on the radio going, oh, we're going to switch back, what's going on? And it all got a little bit messy there.
It was messy, wasn't it?
Whereas the easiest thing to do would have been call Lewis in for an undercut. He undercuts Valtteri. He gets ahead on the strategy. And everyone would go, well, actually, they gave the favored strategy to the guy leading the World Championship. So, yeah,
shrug of the shoulders, on you move.
Yeah, fair enough. So, I think that was the only criticism I have of what they did there in Sochi. I mean, it's very easy for people to say, you know, oh, it's wrong and they shouldn't be, you know, it's against the spirit of racing and we all want to see racing. But, yes, I'm a race driver, I'm a racer, I'm a purist at heart. However, I am not the head of an organization with 1,200 jobs on the line who've all got bonuses potentially coming. I'm not the head of an organization who is responsible to answer to the board of Mercedes and all his sponsors who are pouring millions of euros into that by imposing the team order. And Toto is. And what I think he did wrong, he's paid in that instance, was not big decisions. So I don't disagree with what he did.
Yeah.
And I think Ferrari...
Well, it was very odd to see Ferrari with their history of team orders not imposing them in that situation. And it was one of many occasions last year where a lot of people in this paddock pointed to Sebastian having to go beyond his role of simply driving the car and having to think about the strategy. You can go back a long time to see Sebastian Vettel's frustration and open questioning of his track positioning, the strategy that he's on. It has been a running sore for the 4-time world champion.
Yeah,
and I think...
but sometimes to his own detriment. And I think if you look back to when he was at Red Bull winning all of those world championships, you know, he had Guillaume Roquelin and he had Helmut and he had Christian, and they managed him. You know, Seb isn't completely, free from having a bit of the red mist come down. You look at that moment of road rage in Baku.
Yep.
And occasionally he does have a moment of frustration, and he does have the red mist come down and lose his shirt a little bit. And I think in the Red Bull days, Rocky would often come on the radio and say, Sebastian, listen to me. It's under control. Don't worry. Don't panic. And Rocky really managed him and massaged him and led him to those World Championships. And, Mark Webber made that point to me last year. I remember talking to him about it in Austin. And because Mark was obviously in those meetings. He was in the debrief. He was the guy that Sebastian was fighting against. Yeah. And he'd say you'd often sit in these meetings and you'd hear Rocky, just like the big brother role in a way I was talking about earlier between GP and Max. Rocky would almost put an arm around Sebastian's shoulder and say, look, mate, just chill out. It's under control. Don't worry. We're doing it. We're dealing with it. And I think he's missing a little bit of that at Ferrari. He does need a little bit of that managing, I think.
Yeah, there's a story in when Mark Webber won the Monaco Grand Prix. He talks about it in his book when he said that he was hugely frustrated to have got to the peak of his career so far in 2010, won the Monaco Grand Prix, and then Vettel was told he had a cracked chassis. And he was like, he didn't have a cracked chassis. And that was part of Red Bull management, Helmut Marko, at the time, saying, trying to get a performance out of their driver. And I wonder if there was a sort of conversation before the start of the year where Vettel was open about what he needs and Ferrari were receptive, because it seemed an odd thing to say. Just struck as an odd thing to say in terms of will favour him at the start of the season when we haven't even seen a single time lap.
You're talking about Binotto's comment?
Yes.
Right. Sorry, I was confused there when you were talking about the Webber Monaco story. Sorry.
Yeah.
I try not to read into these things until and unless you know the full context. You have to bear in mind depends on what question he was asked and all those sort of things. So I try not to read into those sort of headlines too much. I think ultimately, and this is something actually Luciano Berti was talking about in a podcast I listened to recently, because Luciano was around at Ferrari in the mid-2000s during that Schumacher era of great success. And he talked about how, Maurizio Arrivabene wasn't a particularly sympathetic leader. He wasn't a particularly, not a leader who really listened to his people. He was quite a strong dictatorial person who was in charge. It was sort of a my way or highway person.
Yeah.
Whereas, Binotto has spent a quarter of a century at Ferrari. He's there through and through, but he's a people person much more, I think. From speaking to some friends of mine who worked with him in the past and are still there now, they have an awful lot of respect for him as a person and as a technical leader. So if he can carry on that sort of sympathetic way into his role as a as a team principal, then perhaps Ferrari will benefit from it. And maybe, he'll sit there and look at the human side and say, look, as a human being, forget racing driver, but as a human being, what does Sebastian Vettel as a human being need to extract the maximum performance that his talent is clearly capable of delivering? Because I don't believe we saw the best of Sebastian Vettel in the second half of last year. We certainly didn't. And I think, hopefully Mattia will make the structure around Sebastian work to extract the best Sebastian Vettel that there is in there.
Will be interesting to see. Just a confirmation of the running order if you are just switching on at the end of the day. 20 minutes to go this opening day of the 2019 season, with Vettel ahead of Grosjean. Vettel has done 161 laps. Grosjean has done 58. Sainz has done 108. He is third. Verstappen, we saw running the clear visor down to turn one a few moments ago as the sun sets here in Barcelona. Fifth, we have Raikkonen on his first day for Alfa Romeo. He's done 104 laps. Daniel Kvyat, sixth with 73. And then we have Perez with 30. Bottas with 69. He swapped cars with Lewis Hamilton, who has done 76, and then 65 laps, I should say, for 10th place Hulkenberg, and his teammate Ricciardo, taking over that car in the afternoon, has done 44 laps as they work through accumulating that data, getting a read. A lot of the teams had shakedowns, of course. It was pretty tight for Renault, currently at the bottom, to get to avoid what's happened to Williams today and not be able to run, but they did manage to have a shakedown, and they have managed to clear 100 laps between their drivers today. Enormous distance. Last year, Sebastian Vettel, the driver you're looking at right now, in that matte livery Ferrari, did 643 laps, and he's up to right now, crossing the start-finish line, 162 logged today, and maybe a signal of intent. He is, after the brutal criticism and a few painful moments he had at the back end of last year, four-time world champion starting this year with the most laps of anyone so far. You can still get your questions in.
Sorry, Alex.
Go on.
Just look at the timing screen. And on our screen, by the way, we've got a Ferrari and a Red Bull running close together. But Carlos Sainz is on a very good lap. He's come across the line in an 18.5, so that's a strong lap to go second fastest for Carlos Sainz. 110 days on his first proper day as an official McLaren driver. He obviously did Abu Dhabi, but that's a strong lap there. But look at these two running close together. This is really good information for Max Verstappen. He's able, and Red Bull are able to understand how closely he's able to follow.
Thinking about the late move.
And he has a lot.
He went into race commentary there. Was going to give it one of Crofty's down the insides.
Yeah.
He did go down the inside at the end, and he made his way through.
Sebastian's
But
back
good
out of
read.
it, I think.
Yeah, good read for Max Verstappen, as you say, for the grip levels of this set of regulations for 2019, as he follows a car for the first time in that sort of trim.
Yeah. Max on the yellow sidewall, medium tyre. Sebastian's actually running the prototype tyre, which is a variation on the medium soft, I believe. So he's running on there. Here's Carlos Sainz. So he's done that time on a set of the soft tyres. So that somewhat explains his gain in performance and his jump up the leaderboard. Lots of flow viz there. You can see on the rear diffuser on the left-hand side, bottom of the floor. So McLaren using every lap possible to gather information and gather data. This is a slow lap for him to cool the tyres, and now he's going to wind himself up to have another go. Coming down the start-finish rate, we can follow him round this lap. DRS wide open into turn one. It's a big year for McLaren, isn't it? As he comes through turn three, the car porpoising, just slightly bouncing a little bit on those bumps through turn two, and chucks it now into turn four. Very good first sector. That's the fastest first sector time we've seen of anybody today, and that includes Sebastian Vettel's Ferrari. So the tyre are starting to work. Well, no, sorry, well, they are working because he's done a good lap before this. But I think you have to also bear in mind the track's got a lot of rubber down now compared to when Vettel did his time this morning. So you can see those chunks of rubber away from the racing line. And Sainz, bit of a lock up into turn 10. He locked the outside front a little bit, I think, as he went into turn 10. And again, the rear of the car stepping slightly out of line. And this is symptomatic of the rear tyres starting to overheat, I think, towards the final part of the lap. And I'd be interested to see. The middle sector is quite some way down from what he did on the previous lap. Out of the final corner, past our commentary box and across the line. Yeah, he doesn't improve in the second or third sectors, and I do think it looks like the tyres have had enough. Basically, he was able to hammer sector 1, and then as the lap went on, he lost 5 tenths in sector 2 and 8 tenths in sector 3. So that could be it on this set of tyres.
After all McLaren have been through in the last few years, given their lofty heights in the past, they will be very cheered indeed to see a car up there in second place. And although times are not the most important thing of this first test, maybe wait until the second one for a proper read of the competitive picture. But that will give everyone a boost back at Woking.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Do you? But do you, in terms of, is it just human nature? Is it not even a conscious thing? If they hadn't done any running today, you would much rather be in McLaren's situation than Williams.
No, obviously. But I don't think that McLaren are going to have a particular boost by being second today, as opposed to Mercedes being 8th or 9th today. I just think that it's too early. It's too early for us to be saying, wow, this Ferrari is mind-blowing because they're at the top of the times by 4/10. I think today isn't about that. Today is about, for these guys at Red Bull Racing, about building relationships. It's about building that relationship with Honda. It's about understanding the beast they've got. It's about understanding the systems. It's for Max Verstappen to get comfortable with how does the car work on engine overrun? How do the different engine modes work? How does it work with lift and coast and fuel consumption? What about cooling? What about, have we had any leaks? Does everything, all the systems work in the way they're supposed to? Today is about mileage and laps. I mean, Max and Red Bull will be I think they'll be very satisfied, frankly, with 120 laps on the board. Their first day with Honda, that's a seriously good amount of laps. Contrast that with what Honda and McLaren did, a few years ago.
Yeah.
It's a big difference. So, I think Christian Horner and Helmut Marko and Max and Pierre Gasly, they'll all be pretty chuffed, really, with that first day. And conversely, I don't think anyone at Woking is going to be getting excited about being P2 on the times today.
I think they might enjoy it a little bit. But we'll agree to disagree.
Well,
I know it doesn't mean anything. I get entirely the point you're making. You're 100% correct.
We could potentially ask Zach Brown, because I think he's here today, so we can ask him. I mean, he's going to be...
Drag him on the review show that is coming up at the top of the hour.
He's obviously going to be happier having done 113 laps.
Yeah, that's the main deal. The laps is absolutely crucial. Vettel has done 166 laps. Sainz has gone over 100 as well, 113. Same applies to Verstappen. I think that is the biggest point that you mentioned there, Karun, with it could be one of the defining things of the season, that Honda and Red Bull relationship, given how good the Red Bull chassis has been year after year. And to get over 100 laps, as you say, sharp contrast to the horror story that began for McLaren and Honda, even when they did their first shakedown with that engine at the back end of 2014.
To me, that is the biggest question mark, and that's the one that I'm most intrigued about heading into this season. Will Honda deliver a power unit that allows Red Bull to be championship contenders again? That is the single biggest question going into this season, because we know Ferrari are capable of producing a car that can win world championships. They did for the last 2 years, arguably, and had probably the fastest car last year. We know Mercedes obviously can. If Red Bull and Honda can, then we've all of a sudden got 6 drivers and 3 teams fighting for this world championship, and that will be fantastic for everyone following Formula One.
Absolutely, and given the form of Verstappen at the back end of last year, after that difficult start to the campaign, when he seemingly was driving into everything, and then he was putting in some absolutely career best performances, what should have been the win in Brazil would surely have been his most impressive performance. That was amazing stuff from him at the back end of last season.
It was. I mean, Mexico, I still argue, is probably the most dominant victory of the season, apart from Lewis and Ricard. But Mexico, if you think about it, he got qualified by Daniel because he had some engine issues on the off throttle. He got qualified by Daniel. He took the lead into turn 1, and I know Daniel retired with an engine issue. I think it was an engine issue at least, anyway. But Max had pulled 25 seconds on Daniel by that stage.
Yeah, it was
equal cars. He had pulled a pit stop on his teammate. That was utter dominance. Forget everybody else, but he pulled an incredible gap. And I think that was the day that told me Max is ready to be a world championship contender. That and Singapore. I thought Singapore was a very mature drive.
What was that? Well, Singapore doesn't stand out. What did
he qualified at the front row.
Yep.
He got to turn 7 on the opening lap, and Sebastian went around the outside of him. And I think Max version 1 would have collided and damaged his front wing with Sebastian.
Fair point.
Max version 2 backed out of the fight, allowed Sebastian to get in front of him there, and then bided his time. And when it came to the round of pit stops, Ferrari blinked first, they pitted first. Max hammered in some mega laps on used tyres to do an overcut, and then outfoxed Sebastian on the outlap. And I thought those were the two races, Singapore and Mexico, that more than Brazil in some ways, but those were the two races that really underlined to me that Verstappen's ready to be a World Championship contender.
And hopefully he will have the equipment to do it, because how good is this season going to be if we have Hamilton in the form of his life up against a resurgent Sebastian Vettel and the young pretender, don't discount Leclerc as well, and a hungry Valtteri Bottas to prove people wrong. It is shaping up to be a phenomenal season, certainly after those 124 laps with the Honda power unit. Of course, this is the first year for a long time that Honda are going to power two teams. Got to go all the way back to when Super Aguri were racing in Formula One for the last time that has happened, and that was sometimes something talked about, maybe McLaren tying up with the Manor team to get double the data and maybe use Manor as the way that Toro Rosso were used last year in terms of mileage and taking penalties, which allowed the brains back in Japan to bring more updates. Renault having a little bit of a dig at that, saying that they weren't able to make the same progress because they weren't able to take all the grid penalties that Toro Rosso were. But it's a bit of a risk for Red Bull to take away an engine that was taking them to race wins, but they don't just want race wins, they want championships, and they have decided, just like McLaren did, that the best way to get those championships is to put Honda power in the back.
Yeah, it's different scenarios in some ways. You know, McLaren at the time were partnered with Mercedes. They chose to go away from being a customer Mercedes team to a works Honda team. That didn't work out for them at the time. Red Bull have gone from being a customer Renault team to a works Honda team. However, Honda have now had a few years back in the sport. They've now had, they've had 4 seasons of being back in F1, and they've got, Red Bull are hoping that all the pain that McLaren went through is going to pay dividends for them, which is, I think Red Bull have done the right thing. I think if I was Helmut Marko and Christian Horner, I'd make the same call. I think it's the right decision to do something different. There's no point just sticking with what they had and just finishing third all the time. They don't exist to finish third. They exist to win.
So Vettel, Sainz, Grosjean, Verstappen, Raikkonen the top 5, but the laps, 4 drivers over 100, pretty key as well as we come into the final few moments of the day.
Yeah, I can see Toto Wolff and Esteban Ocon actually have just wandered to the pit wall to watch the last 5 minutes of testing. So Esteban Ocon, of course, this today will hurt him. Being here at the track, watching other cars, it's the worst feeling in the world. I remember when I became a reserve driver at Lotus in 2011 and going to a test and watching cars going around for the first time was agonizing. And being a racing driver, hanging around a racetrack, watching other people driving is an awful feeling. So I sympathize with him. And at the start of the year he'll feel all bright-eyed, bush-tailed, and go to all the meetings, go to all the briefings, and be up for it. By the time we get halfway through the season, it's a really frustrating existence in some ways, because you can't contribute things, because whatever you're saying, and you might have good ideas and good suggestions and things you want to say, but the team will always listen to the race drivers first.
Yep.
So the benefit for him is obviously the contribution he can make in the simulator. He can do a lot of development in the simulator, and Mercedes do put a lot of emphasis on what they do in the sims. So he can do things that are beneficial, but it will be very tough for him not being here driving the car. So listen, Alex, I've got to leave you to go join Rachel and Crofty down in the paddock. So I'm going to leave you
for the review show, which is coming up in just under 5 minutes' time. Yep. We'll let you go. Karun, always a pleasure.
Good to see you.
And we will finish the final few moments of the day. Just saw Vettel head out in the Ferrari for a final run of a day where he is going to top the times. Also heading out, Carlos Sainz. We can see Grosjean in your picture at the moment. Verstappen is out there, and Raikkonen as well. Yeah, just a few minutes until the review show coming up for you on Sky, and it will be a very eventful day for Rachel, Crofty and Karun to look back at, and quite a lot to unpick. It was a day that began with a spin for Kimi Raikkonen and a lot of talk about the Alfa Romeo. It was launched at what seems like an age ago, mainly because it was an age ago, at before 9 o'clock this morning. Huge gaggle of photographers at the end of the pit lane as Toto Wolff and Esteban Ocon in animated conversation going back into the Mercedes garage as Sebastian Vettel winds it up once again, and he crosses the line to begin his 169th lap of the day. A reminder, 66 laps, the normal race distance around this circuit that they know, well, better than the back of their hands. That matte livery on the Ferrari, which looks more orange than scarlet, and he makes his way through the turns. And Vettel moving himself nicely through the corners. He'll be very, very satisfied with his day's work and his lap time. Not about the lap times, no disputing that, because you don't know the fuel loads that the teams are running, and he's not on one of the designated C1 to C5 tyres. We do have soft, medium and hard in 2019, which is simplifying it in one way, but you're going to be spending the whole season hearing about C1, C2 and C3. Lucky old you. And it is going to be a phenomenal season in prospect, whether Vettel can pick it back up and return to the level that we saw, maybe not last year, but maybe in his dominant seasons in 2011 and 2013, where he was just, when he was comfortable with that car, absolutely unmatchable. And so the minimum laps done out there today, coming from Sergio Perez, and Perez has 30 laps to his name. The maximum, Sebastian Vettel with 169 laps to his name. We've got the review show coming up in a few moments' time to recap everything that's happened. And right at the end of the day, the man who provided us drama at the start provides us drama at the end. Kimi Raikkonen brought out the red flag at the very start when he got down to turn 5. First moments of the morning, and at the very end he is pulled over to the side of the racetrack to bring out the yellow flags, and less than a minute to go and the red flag is out. Race control have had enough. Well, not actual race control, because we're in race control in the commentary box. We're not up in the grandstand like we normally would be, and so Kimi Raikkonen, a spin to start the day, and at the end pulling over to the side of the circuit. And it's been an entertaining opening day of the testing. So this is what we've had across the day. Green light at the end of the pit lane. That was the moment I was speaking about for Kimi Raikkonen earlier on. He wasn't the last person to have a moment, though. This was Romain Grosjean finding the gravel, but this time escaping on one of his 169 tours. Sebastian Vettel going round, and this was at turn 15. The Haas of Grosjean having a fuel pressure problem, it was reported. There was a minor issue in the afternoon for Carlos Sainz, but McLaren were able to diagnose it and improve. Max Verstappen going off as he chased lap time as well as logging the data. Little bit of gravel, but it was a fairly uneventful session, apart from cars maybe getting in each other's way, which certainly happened with the Toro Rosso of Kvyat and Lewis Hamilton. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a phenomenal day in terms of finally seeing those cars out on the circuit. and Sebastian Vettel, the fastest driver on the first day of the season ahead of Carlos Sainz. Romain Grosjean was third ahead of Max Verstappen. Kimi Raikkonen was fifth with those incidents at the start and finish of the day. Daniel Kvyat sixth, Sergio Perez in seventh, Valtteri Bottas was eighth ahead of Lewis Hamilton in ninth. Hulkenberg was 10th, and the last runner today was Daniel Ricciardo. The other drivers will get a go apart from Kubica and George Russell, who will have to wait until Wednesday. Coming up now on Sky, we have a chance to review the day for the next hour. Thank you very much for joining us, and join us again tomorrow when we're going to do it all over again.